Okay, this is English 101, week 13, part 6. All right, cool. All right, so I'm looking at paragraph 13 now. This is the second paragraph in the section, Mainstream Media Fetishizes Black Pain. Meaning like they have like a weird obsession with seeing black people being hurt if they're in the movie at all. A lot of times people don't put black people in the movie at all, and then when they do, it's like you're watching black people be hurt. All right. So, Sajay Elder, a writer, editor, podcast host, and producer who edited the Joy issue of The Ethnic Isle, an online magazine focused on multicultural views, agrees, noting there's headway being made, but black representation can be one-dimensional and almost like we aren't allowed to be anything else besides downtrodden, meaning like beaten down, retelling the stories of trauma that give an understanding of our experience. Like, you should be allowed to make a movie about black people where they're not slaves. Or they're not, being hunted or whatever. All right, cool. I don't think I have a whole lot to say about that. I think this is going pretty smoothly. Okay, so now we are in the next section. Next section is called Black Joy is a Way to Protect Ourselves from Anti-Blackness. I'm going to come back to this, but it's interesting that like the person in Elder, who is the quote in paragraph 13, is like it's almost like in media. If you watch enough movies, you feel like black people aren't allowed to be happy. It's an interesting point to make. All you're allowed to do is revisit the trauma of slavery or whatever, or of other kinds of trauma and pain and torture and shit. All right, so the next section is called Black Joy is a Way to Protect Ourselves from Anti-Blackness. That's an interesting thing to say, that a lot of people, a lot of American culture is sort of anti-black people. And black joy, sorry, my phone's being weird. It's that black joy is a way of protecting yourself from all of these negative forces in the world. I mean, negative, like trying to kill you negative, but also trying to make you downtrodden, trying to beat you down. So paragraph 14. Roderick says, so when black people express joy, we're not just happy. We're not just talking about being happy here. We're also signaling our strength and humanity in the face of a history and culture that sought to keep us down. So a lot of American culture has been about controlling. We'll come back to that because that's important. A lot of American culture is about controlling and containing sort of black people and silencing them, not listening to them. Again, partly because it's almost like guilt. Because so much of America was built by black slavery, which involved kidnapping black people and forcing them to work for no money. And so now there are still black people in America. And honestly, a lot of black people in America remind white people of the history of slavery, and they feel guilty and bad about it, and then they lash out. Because it's like one of the most, it's like the crime. Slavery was one of the key crimes, along with killing all the Native Americans, that sort of founded the country. And people do not like to be reminded of past crimes. And America as a nation is in part founded on the history of slave labor, and nobody wants to think about that. And so if you bring it up, they get upset. But just black people, sometimes white people feel like black people bring it up just by existing, which is crazy. Okay, so she says, Roderick says, so when black people express joy, we're not just happy, we're also signaling our strength and humanity in the face of a history and culture that sought to keep us down. Right, that's cool. It's like a form of resistance, to be happy in this culture that's trying to kill you all the time and make your lives miserable and not pay you as much as other people, and, making you live in bad areas and, having bad water in those areas and whatever the problems are that black people face. It says, They're signaling our strength and humanity in the face of a history and a culture that sought to keep us down. But our joy is confusing to the dominant culture, meaning white people. White people are confused when black people are happy, like this Becky lady. It's dissonant. It's like a bad note that sounds like black joy is dissonant, meaning it kind of doesn't go along with what you're supposed to do. Like think of someone playing an instrument that's playing the wrong notes. Black joy is dissonant, pushing back against an overwhelming and limited narrative, because the narrative is black people suffering. And when black people are happy, it's like, what? That doesn't make sense. That's not the story of America. It's dissonant, pushing back against an overwhelming and limited narrative. It's why my small celebratory post was an act of resistance, though I didn't necessarily intend it to be. Paragraph 15. Such acts of care and joy have long been a way in which we cope. Being joyful is a way of coping with all the terrible things in the world, particularly the anti-black things in America. Charmaine A. Nelson, a professor of art history at McGill University, notes that during slavery, our ancestors were denied access to self-care and things that bring joy, choosing love, grooming, and anointing our bodies, because of a lack of leisure time and demand for constant labor. So because black people were slaves, or even when they weren't slaves, had to work so much just to put food on the table, they didn't get to spend time on things that brought them joy. Choosing love, grooming, and anointing our bodies because of a lack of leisure time and demand for constant labor. You think, who is going to bother to do that in those circumstances? But our ancestors did bother because that's how they maintained their humanity, she says. So it's interesting to think about Black joy as a form of resistance against sort of a dominant white culture that's trying to control people, because one of the things they're trying to do is make sure that people don't have any fun because they're supposed to be slave labor or whatever, and a lot of modern day people still think like that. Sure, I'll be back in a second.